so much for having me. I'm so excited to be chatting with you all. Serverless is one of my favorite things. And so today I'm going to be talking a little bit about the AWS Amplify Admin UI, which behind the scenes is all different serverless technologies. So I am a senior developer advocate and I lead and manage the Amplify team of developer advocates. And I'm a Spittel everywhere on social media. So if you want to chat about this afterwards, then you can follow me there. But it's really exciting because I get to work on the tool that I'm showing you all day, every day. And I feel very lucky to be able to do that. So our goals for this talk are to, one, build a fun application, always important. The second one is to discuss the underlying services. And then the third one is to learn a little bit about AWS Amplify. So what we'll do is we'll create data, we'll model a backend schema for application, we'll test that out locally, and you don't need an AWS account for this step. Then we'll deploy it, then we'll manage our data, and then we'll extend it with the Amplify command line interface. So we'll be creating a video course throughout this, like a video course platform, something like a very simple Egghead.io or YouTube or something along those lines. So we'll be integrating all these sorts of services throughout. So AWS Amplify is a set of AWS tools that is targeted specifically to front-end and mobile developers, but behind the scenes, it's using a lot of AWS services that are powering all the sites that you use. There's no toy part of this or anything like that. It's the real services behind the scenes, but Amplify makes it easier for somebody like me, who's more of a front-end developer than a heavy cloud engineer, to use these services. So I like to think of full stack development as evolving. So back in the day, there were static websites with HTML and CSS, but then the web became no longer static with the rise of PHP and Cold Fusion and all of that. And then we went on to the framework era. So you may remember in 2005, Ruby on Rails made this YouTube video on how to deploy a blog in 5 minutes or create a blog in 15 minutes. And that kind of brought on this era of framework development, where these frameworks made it easier to develop a full stack web app. And Ruby on Rails and Django are two of my favorites. They write a lot of the code for you, though. You can do like Rails G migration, and it writes your code for you. And then we have the serverless era, where Jamstack apps have made it so that the deployment processes for these apps are a lot easier. You don't need to worry about the cloud infrastructure yourself. And you can mostly focus on doing that front-end logic with a little tiny bit of back-end where you need it. And so you don't need to battle with the server stuff yourself. So I have been really enjoying watching this progression throughout my career. And I think that low-code development might be in the mix here and take the developments from that full stack framework era and the serverless era and put them together. So I think this is a really scary term for a lot of developers. It's like, is our job going to go away? People aren't going to need to write code anymore. And I don't think that that's the case at all, because there's been these sites like Squarespace or any of these other platforms where you can develop without code, and it's just expanded our jobs rather than detracted from them. We still need to make the custom logic ourselves, but maybe we're starting at a place that we don't need to write all the repetitive code ourselves. And the same thing with Ruby on Rails, where it generated a lot of the code for us so that we can focus on the exciting business logic rather than the boring stuff. And so I think that the power of low code would be code generation. So using a visual interface that would allow us to have all the code behind the scenes, but make it so that some of that code is written for you so that you can focus on the hard stuff rather than the stuff that you've implemented over and over and over again. That's one of the reasons I moved to developer advocacy instead of being a software engineer anymore. I found that I was writing the same features over and over again, and I was getting bored of it. So I'm excited for an era where we no longer need to do that. So instead of having hundreds of lines of code to do something, maybe you can just do the same thing in one line of code or a couple lines of code. A lot of that is abstracted away from the developer, at least the stuff that you need to implement over and over again. And I think in some ways, the less code, the better, because code is really expensive. When we think of early stage startups, the most expensive thing for them to hire is developers. And I think that that's true of companies throughout their lifespans. And so code itself is expensive too. There's bugs in it and you need to maintain it. And then we need to still have good customizability and developer experience, because those are the things that allow you to build and scale. You don't want to just be stuck at an early stage for an app. You want some technologies that will scale as you do. And so I'm really excited about this idea of empowering developers to do more with less code and in the easiest way possible. And so I think the power of low code would be this interesting combination of the framework era of development and the serverless era, where we don't need to manage all the cloud infrastructure ourselves. We don't need to start from scratch with the code. We can combine these two pieces of technology and make it so that we have something really powerful that developers get to focus on the hard stuff. So again, we're going to be talking about this AWS Amplify Admin UI, which I think does a lot of this right. And again, it isn't a flimsy toy. It's got all the same AWS technologies behind the hood. So if you want to follow along with this demo, you can go to sandbox.amplifyapp.com and start out with me. I did all the demos via video because the live code gremlins always come out to get me and it's the worst. So everything is pre-recorded. So I'm not just writing code really, really fast. So the first step that we're going to take on is data. So we're going to create a database schema visually. So again, this is what you get to if you go to that sandbox.amplifyapp.com, and you can click Get Started under Create an App Backend to create the schema. Then you can choose place to start, so data authentication or file storage. I'll start with data, and I'll start with a blank schema. There are starters if you want to see examples too, and then you can add in your field. So I'm adding a title and description. Again, we're creating a video course site, so you have courses and then videos that belong to those courses. So the video will have a title, description, and an order, because video courses, they normally have order. This is the first video, this is the second video, this is the third video. And then you can change the data types of these fields too. It's a little drop down. You can also check to make something required as well. And then you can add relationships between the data. So one to many, for example, a course will have many videos associated with it. Then you can test this out locally in your app. You can use a web app with React, Vue, Angular, any of those web frameworks that you like to use. You can also use mobile, either iOS, Android, or Flutter or React Native. All of those work. So I'm going to create a React app here because that's what I am most comfortable with personally. And then you need to install the Amplify command line interface. That takes a minute to run. Then you need to install the Amplify libraries and initialize Amplify. You also need to install TypeScript, just for the reason that the generated code uses TypeScript. And so it'll make the developer experience a little bit better. And you can see that a lot of code files were generated for me. Most of these you don't need to worry about. The AWS exports.js is going to be the information of where things are actually hosted, like your API keys, your public keys, and your links to your APIs and the cloud and all that. There's also a GraphQL schema. So behind the scenes, the data that you generated in that last step visually, it generated GraphQL code for you. So let's talk about the technologies under the hood here. So the first one is Amplify Data Store, which is under the hood IndexedDB plus the availability for that to sync to an online database. So when we're doing this, first step where we're offline, we're not connected to AWS, we're not in the cloud. You don't even need an AWS account to use any of this. All that data is being stored locally in IndexedDB, which if you've used local storage before, it's really similar to that. It just allows you to store more data, and it's also asynchronous. So you then are able to automatically sync that with a database that is in the cloud. So in this case, it'll be DynamoDB. We'll talk about that in a minute. And that's really, really helpful if you need to create an app that's available both online and offline. This is something that I've done so many times as a developer. I used to work at Dev2, and they have all those offline pages for if you're offline. There's like a drawing page that you can do. Also, a fun one that I implemented is there's an offline online editor. So if you're typing a blog post and then you go offline, it backs that up using local storage so that you don't lose that blog post that you're writing. And so data store makes it much easier to implement something like that. I have a YouTube video and blog post about that if anybody's interested. So Appsync is on top or is below the hood for data store, and it is a managed GraphQL API service. So instead of having to make that GraphQL API yourself on the back end, you can use Appsync in order to do that for you. Then there's DynamoDB, which is a serverless key value and document database that's super scalable. Most Amazon services are running on it at some capacity. And so Amplify is interfacing with that, storing the data in there. And this is all provisioned automatically for you as soon as you deploy to the cloud. So let's talk about testing locally in your app first. So in the last video, we talked about how to install Amplify and get a React app set up. Again, you don't need to use React. I just am most comfortable with React, so that's what I did. But what we're going to do is what I call copy and paste driven development. So there's a lot of code generation. So you can copy and paste code snippets and then change them to what you need to for your app. So I'm creating a button where if you click it, it's going to allow us to create a new course. So I'll create an add course function here. I'll import data store and then my course model. So all of those models are generated as TypeScript models. So you can go into the models directory and see all of them within there. I'm using window.prompt, which I'm not sure if you all have been following the latest drama, but apparently prompt is no longer going to be in Chrome, which makes me very sad for purely the purposes of doing demos. But I'm making it so that you get a prompt for the title and then the description of the course, and it's going to save it to data store. And that's what that code looks like in order to save a new course. I'm also going to add a use effect so that I pull down all of my courses whenever the page loads. So I'm creating a pull data function with the asynchronous ability there, and then I'm pulling the data. And then again, I'm doing this copy and paste driven development where I am looking for the code to query for my courses, copying and pasting that. And then there we go. I'm getting my course back. So creating another course, and then I'm refreshing the page, and now you see that I have 2 courses. So again, this is all done locally right now. Nothing is being synced to the cloud, and you do not need an AWS account for any of this. You could just do this on your own machine. So then the next step is actually to deploy this to the cloud with AWS. And so you click the deploy to AWS button right there on the page. Also, if at any point you want to change your data model, you can go back to the model data tab, change anything, and then run the Amplify pull to sync those changes locally. Kind of follows this Git-like model of Amplify push to deploy anything locally, Amplify pull to pull anything from the cloud. So then you can create an AWS account or log into your own AWS account. Most of these services do fall under the free tier. So I'll log in and then name my app. In this case, I'll just do like video course. And then you want to pick a region. So US East 1 is what I'm going for here. Then confirm that. It's going to take a couple minutes to deploy everything to the cloud. Then once it's deployed, you can open this admin UI. And then in here, you can view that data model. So you could still update it within here. You can manage your app content. So it gives you a form where you can create a new course. So I notice this all the time as a software engineer, where you'd build the initial app for the end customer, but then you'd have to build a secondary app that the employees would use to update data on the backend side. So it's kind of like a CMS of sorts, except Markdown too. So I will create a new video as well and save the course, or I guess not create a new video yet, just you can link those there. And then it has the local setup instructions, and you run this Amplify pull with the app ID, and this will make it so that your app is synced to the cloud version instead of just the local version of the app. So mine will be JavaScript React source build, and yes, I will update locally. So you can also enable authentication using this view as well, which we will also chat about. So the next step is managing your app, which we saw that you can update your data model. You can also add authentication. So that's what I'm going to do now. Is I'm going to click add or enable authentication here. And so by default, it's going to be email, but you can add in Google, Amazon, or sign in with Apple, just launched last week as well. So if you want to do that, that is now a possibility. You can also do multi-factor authentication and get different information from those users. You can set a different password policy as well. Then you can save and deploy. Once it's done deploying, you can run Amplify pull to get those changes locally. And then I'm installing the AWS Amplify React components, which will allow me to use those React components to add them to my code instead of writing them from scratch. So the with authenticator higher order component, I'm going to use that, and then it's going to give me a sign in form. I can create an account with my username, password, email, and phone number. I'm not going to show you all my phone number though. Going to skip that step. And then you can manage your users and groups within the admin UI as well. So I can do my email, and then I can send a temporary password that they have to reset upon signing in for the first time. You can also create different user groups. So admin, for example, you can also go back to your data model and add in different authorization roles as well. So if you only want, for example, an admin to be able to create, read, update, and delete, you can set that up, or you can make it so that only the owners can do so. And now you can do this with multi-auth as well. So you can make it so that there are multiple different authenticate or authorization rules as well. In addition, you can give access to people without an AWS account to this. You can see that it's not within the AWS console. It's like amplifyapp.com if you look at that URL there. And so this allows you to give access to your team members without them having an AWS account. You can either give them access to everything or only access to managing the data. So if you have somebody who's like a content editor who you don't want them to be able to remodel your data, but you want them to be able to upload blog posts, you can give those permissions to people as well. So behind the scenes, this is using Amazon Cognito, which does this user sign up and sign in for you, as well as multi-factor authentication. So then some of the services that Amplify enables are via that admin UI, but we have even more with the command line interface. So if you want to add S3 storage, Lambda functions, if you want to add like predictions, you can do all of those things through the command line interface. And if you're more comfortable with the command line interface in the first place, you can start from that direction as well. Both of these are forwards and backwards compatible. So if you start with the command line interface, you can use the admin UI. If you use the admin UI, you can use the command line interface. So they go back and forth. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add my videos and make it so that they're actually stored in the cloud. So I'm mapping through my courses, listing them on the page. And then I'm going to create a component for my video form. And I will import that onto my home screen as well. Make it so that I can add a video to each one of my courses. I'll also pass my course ID down so that I can associate the video with its parent course. I'll create my form now. So I do quick cheats for demos, but you would want to make this much more accessible in real life. So 2 of the fields will be text fields. That'll be the name and the description of the video. Then there will be the number field for the order, and then a file for the actual videos themselves. Then I'll import useState from React so that we have a state field set up here. I'll do the title set title, and then also the description. So we have 2 state fields there. Then we need one for the order as well. We'll start with 0 for that one because it's a numeric field. And then we'll need to store the video file as well. Then we'll add on change events to each one of my inputs. And again, everything that I'm doing here is React specific, but it does not need to be. You could use Angular or Vue or whatever instead. And that one I'll need to make it into an integer instead of a string. And I'll take the first video file that's uploaded, and then I'll add in my on submit. That will be another asynchronous function. And then we'll need to, again, do copy and paste driven development, grab my code from here on how to create a new video. It's got the imports, but then also that second code snippet for saving a new video. So I'll paste that in. And then I'll use the data from the form instead of the mock data there. So I'll set the title, the description, the order. And then I'll need to take the course ID from my props. The other thing that I'll need to do is upload the video file to Amazon S3. And so I'm going to enable storage for my app. So through the command line interface, I'll do Amplify as storage. I'll store data in S3 when that comes up, where it'll be content that's stored. You can use the automatically generated names and things like that. Then you can always do the least privilege principle of only giving people access to what they need. So in this case, I'm giving everybody access to everything, but in a production app, you'd want to give less. And then you run Amplify push to deploy that to the cloud. So again, that Git-like model of push pull. Then I'll import the storage function from AWS Amplify. And I'll do storage.put. Put makes it so that you can upload a file to the cloud. So you need to have a key and a value for this. So the key will be the name of the file, so the video ID, and then the video file. I'll also prevent the default action so the page doesn't submit. And now what I need to do is I've implemented the video upload, but what I need to do is I need to make it so that the videos actually render on that home page. So my video query will be a data store.query for all of the videos. So I'll set my state with those videos. I'll just grab the first one for now. And then what I'll need to do is I'll need to query for my image within storage. So I'll use that key. So the video query 0.id, because that's the name of the video that I uploaded in the last step. And again, in a production app, you'd probably want to loop through all of them instead of just getting the first one. So now I'm going to create a video item. I'll have my source for it, which is that video file. I'll also add in the controls. And now you can see that I have a video hosted on the cloud that is uploaded. It's one of my intros for a YouTube video, so it's my face. So that is how to create a full stack app using AWS Amplify. We're going to move on to some quick questions. So if anybody has them, feel free to drop them in the chat and I can try to answer them for you. But if you want to learn more, the best place to start is the docs.amplify.aws. I'm always publishing new content on my platforms too. So I'm Spittel everywhere except for YouTube. I'm Spittel dev on there. Spittel was taken. And the other thing is that if you want to also work on this all day, we are hiring. So reach out to me wherever and I can link you up with jobs. Thank you so much for attending. This has been a ton of fun.
Thank you, Allie. That was fantastic. I've only gotten to mess with the Amplify Admin UI a little bit, and I'm actually very impressed with all the things you can do there. Without even necessarily digging into code, writing schemas yourself, and things like that. So that was amazing. We do have some questions from the audience, but I also want to kind of point out one of the things I love was you kind of mentioned how low code like kind of relates to serverless in the sense I think there is kind of this you're doing serverless doesn't mean that you don't have to care at all about your server, where the stuff is deployed, but you care less. You're not so worried about it in like it's almost like a codeless, rather than low code, where it's like, I still have to know some code, right? I still have to be able to code. I can't just do this without knowing how to code, but I have to worry a little bit less about the details of the code and spend a little bit less time on nitty gritty stuff that really is time consuming, but not really the important parts of the application in many senses, right?
Yeah, I very much agree with that. I think that that's a huge piece of this, that instead of focusing on the things that we've all implemented a million times, like I don't want to write in another sign-in form, right? That's just something that I've done so many times in my career that I feel like that wheel has been invented and I don't want to reinvent it a bunch of times. So I'd rather use a React component that does that for me and spend my time on the more complicated stuff that fits my application rather than the stuff that I've done before. And so I think that that's kind of a big piece of serverless too, is that I've, before the days of serverless, I spent so much of my life like deploying applications on our own servers at different companies that I worked for. Mm-hmm. And it takes a huge amount of time. And that time could be better spent on making sure that you have something that's a less repeated process done in your company or something like that. And so that's where I think a lot of this power lies, is freeing up developer time so that we can focus on the things that are really important to the company rather than reinventing the wheel.
Yeah. There's, in anything you do, I think there's a lot of boilerplate code, for instance, that you just, if you don't have to write it, you don't. In fact, you brought up Cold Fusion, funny enough, and I got my start in Cold Fusion like 20 something years ago. And one of the things I built was a code generator that did kind of like what Amplify is doing for the model. So I didn't have to like actually write all the code to like map out the model to the Cold Fusion code. And so yeah, these aren't new ideas, but I think it's gotten better. We've moved a lot further now. So I do want to get to the questions from the audience. First up, Jaden asks, what services are comparable to AWS Amplify, and how is AWS Amplify different from, like, say, other alternatives?
Yeah, for sure. So I would say that probably the two most similar out there right now are Firebase and Supabase. So Firebase has been around for a while. I would say what's different about AWS is that with Firebase. Firestore, you can kind of outgrow at some point, whereas behind the scenes, AWS Amplify is using DynamoDB, so it scales as you do. So that's one difference there. Supabase is really awesome too. They are also open source, so we are open source. You can go onto our GitHub, it's AWS Amplify, and see all the library code and all that. In fact, I sometimes do that when I'm writing tutorials. I want to get under the hood and figure out what's actually going on, so I definitely do that. So I really respect what Supabase is doing as well. They are using Postgres, so a little bit of a different data model there where it's SQL instead of NoSQL. We also have a little bit more services supported as well, but those I would say are the two closest comparisons within the industry.
Cool. So Michael asks, is it possible to use Amplify to build an app using auth and API, for example, but hosting it myself? I've found that Amplify provides super easy Cognito usage for me, but because I'm trying to go the route of Nuxt SSR on Lambda, I have to deploy via serverless framework instead of Amplify.
Yeah, for sure. So you can pick and choose the different services that you use. So I didn't mention hosting at all in this, but we also have front-end hosting as well. But you can use your own front-end hosting if you want, and then AWS Amplify for the Cognito piece of it or the API piece. You can pick and choose what you end up using. I would love, though, to see that feature request for the Nuxt SSR because I'm pushing for that really hard. We have Next SSR now fully supported, and it's awesome. I'm trying to get the same for Nuxt. So if you can leave a GitHub issue on that, I would love it. It's something that I'm pushing for.
And Atman asks, cost-wise, is it different from other AWS services if we run our own server? I don't know that.
Yeah, that's a really good question too. So behind the scenes, this is using all of those AWS services. So it's using Lambda, it's using Cognito, it's using DynamoDB. And so all the billing for those is going to be exactly the same. So if you go to their pricing pages, it's going to look exactly the same. Amplify just adds this abstraction on top of those, and Amplify doesn't charge itself for any of that. And depending on your use case, serverless will probably be less expensive than a serverful option unless you're at very large scale or something, but that's going to be kind of the answer for anything serverless. And then the other side of it is hosting, and that's the only one that is really its own service. And so that has billing information as well. There's billing for the hosting piece of it, but also the code building part of it as well. So if you're building a React app, for example, it has to build that. And so that's a charge as well. There's information about that if you just search AWS Amplify pricing, it takes you to a pricing page and you can view all of that on paper.
Awesome. Michael also asks, is Amplify ever planning on offering a SQL option?
Oh, that's a good question. It's something that we have gotten requested a lot. And I think that in the future that could be an option. I think almost the best option would be to make it so that DynamoDB is so easy to use that it feels as easy as using a normal SQL option. But yes, and the other thing is that if you do some customization right now, you can use Aurora DB instead of DynamoDB if you want to. It'll be a couple extra steps, but there are blog posts on how to do this. It's in the documentation as well. So it does support it now. It just takes a little bit more work than the DynamoDB option.
Okay, and this might be a tough one, but what do you say to people like Gary who are concerned about these kind of tools when vendor lock-in? Like how do you feel, how easy would it be for me if I chose to try to do this on Amplify to say move some of the services somewhere else?
Yeah, for sure. So I think that that's a big concern for some people depending on your use case. What I would say is to think about the different trade-offs, which is always kind of the answer. What is the reason why vendor lock-in is a big deal? The other thing is we have had customers write abstractions on top of this so that they could easily swap out their backend service if they ever need to. So you can write abstractions yourself in your own code to make it so that that process would be easier down the road. The other thing is that if you wanted to transition off of AWS Amplify onto just AWS, all the CloudFormation code is generated for you, and the libraries can be used with existing services that aren't provisioned through Amplify. And so that's another option as well if your problem wasn't AWS, it was Amplify specific.
Cool. I don't know if you'll know the answer to this one, but I don't know, mispronounce his name. Mosin asked, do you know of like if they plan to open Amplify access in Iran?
Oh, that's a really good question. I don't know of plans specifically, but I know that they're always adding AWS regions and AWS regions for Amplify specifically too. So I don't know of any specific plans for it, but I would request it and see what can be done.
Okay, awesome. So, and I had a question about the code snippets. I mean, so does it, first of all, does it by default, like when you create the data backend, is it always creating a GraphQL based like interface for it?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Through the admin UI, yes, it is GraphQL, and that's what allows for a lot of that code generation. But through the command line interface, there's also a REST API option, and it will generate an Express API on top of your data model. So if you want that instead, you can definitely do that. It'll create a REST API through API Gateway and AWS Lambda.
Okay,
So
that's good to know. I mean, I love GraphQL myself, but I was just curious about that. And then the code snippets, are they always like JavaScript, or it looked like they were all just kind of regular JavaScript code snippets, not like even framework based, right? I mean,
yeah. So there are some components that are framework based. So there are React components, Angular components, Vue components. And then there's the libraries. So that is the JavaScript code snippets that I was using, but also that's supported for native. So if you wanted to use iOS or Android instead, or Flutter or React Native, all of those are supported as well.
Awesome. Okay. And so the last question, probably the most important question you're going to ask today. So apparently Jaden was listening, and instead of Amazon Cognito, he heard Amazon Taquito. Is there an Amazon Taquito in the works? Apparently everybody wants tacos.
Okay, no, okay. So I love Taco Bell. Taco Bell is like my favorite. I'm vegetarian, and they're like the fast food place that does vegetarian food. So Taco Bell did a video for AWS on their cloud architecture, and AWS Amplify was on it. And I was like screaming to all my coworkers, like, Taco Bell uses our stuff. Taco Bell uses Amplify. You all have to check this out. So it's on the AWS YouTube if anybody wants to check out Taco Bell's cloud infrastructure.
So basically what you're saying is there already is an Amazon Taquito.
Yes. Yeah. I think that they named everything that they use to, like all of their different apps, they name after Taco Bell items too, which it was great. It was a great thing to watch.
That's funny. All right, Ellie. Well, that answers all the questions from the audience and all of my questions. That was a fabulous presentation. We really appreciate you taking the time to come out and share all this with us. And I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was awesome.